From the Eagle jumping out to kick his greatest rival's teammate, to the Rowdy refusing to shake hands with Cupcake, these are the UFC fighter's most pettiest moments. First up, the time Khabib Nurmagomedov lost it at UFC 229. I mean, everyone knew that he hated Conor McGregor, but he just decided to take things to a different level that night. After choking the life out of the Notorious, the Eagle wasn't happy that his opponent took the easier way out and tapped in front of an arena full of Irish fans. Apparently, Conor's corner was talking trash at the Dagestani throughout the fight, and Khabib wasn't satisfied with how the fight ended, so he decided to take it outside the cage. He pointed at McGregor's corner and threw his mouthguard at them. Then he got on the top of the UFC cage and drop-kicked Dylan Donnie's into oblivion. The incident is one of the most infamous post-fight brawls there is, and Khabib later apologized for his actions. He was just triggered by the trash talking and the antics that Conor had been doing in the build-up to the fight, but the Eagle wasn't pleased when the Irishman dragged his family and faith into it. He was just bottling it all up and just let it all loose on that fateful night. The Nevada State Athletic Commission obviously investigated the incident and decided to suspend both Khabib as well as McGregor, in addition to penalizing them with fines. But at least everyone was kind of expecting some kind of reaction from Khabib on this. Imagine if a fighter sucker punches their opponent, which was exactly what Paul Daley did in his fight against Josh Koscheck. You see guys, Kos had a knack for getting under people's skin. He was famous for running his mouth, and this often drew some sort of reaction from his opponents. During their fight in 2010, Josh was doing the same thing to Daley in the Octagon, and on top of that, he was dominating Paul too. The Brit had no answer to Koscheck's wrestling, and it only made it worse for him, because Josh was rubbing it in during the match. After the 3 rounds were over, Daley couldn't take it anymore, and even when the ref was separating the two men, Paul stalked Kos down and threw a left hook at his face. Once the fight was over, a furious Dana White announced that Daley won't ever step inside the UFC Octagon again and banned him from the promotion for life. You know when the boss promises something, he makes good on it. The Brit never saw the inside of the UFC cage again. Some guys just never understand the concept of stopping. Rousimar Palhares was a similar case, and he too got himself banned from the UFC. The Brazilian had a history of submitting other fighters, but he had problems releasing them even when they tapped out. In 2010, Palhares was suspended for 3 months after his win in UFC 111. He had Tomas Derval in a heel hook and refused to let go of it even when his opponent tapped. You'd think that a suspension might make him contemplate some of his life decisions, but this wasn't the case with Rousimar. In 2013, he did that again. Palhares submitted Mike Pierce in just 31 seconds into the fight, but once again he refused to let go of the heel hook. The record shows that Mike tapped 8 times before the ref broke the Brazilian's grip on him. Dana decided to cut Palhares off after this incident, because he was still in trouble with what he did to Derval and his use of steroids. The UFC may have let him go, but the psychopath continued doing this to his opponents wherever he fought. I really can't say what was wrong with him, but this was apparently a common theme for the Brazilian. Dana comes down hard on guys who behave like this, and he did so with the next entry too. Yep, I'm talking about Jason High. So he was let go too. To be fair, he kinda deserved it. High was fighting UFC legend Rafael dos Anjos in 2014 and was TKO'd. The Brazilian proved too much for Jason, and when he couldn't take it any longer, the ref decided to step in to stop the fight. High didn't agree with that stoppage decision though, so he protested a little too violently, shoving the match official in the octagon because he wasn't pleased that the fight was waved off. Uncle Dana immediately took notice of this and decided that this was a line that no one was allowed to cross. Jason was apologizing for the incident on social media, but Dana's mind was made up. Going after a fellow fighter is one thing, but the referees are just trying to do their jobs. Somehow that isn't even the strangest thing on this list, because Colby Covington decided to go after a whole country. You see guys, the Chaos was in a bit of a pickle just before his fight with Demian Maia in 2017. The UFC brass told him that they're gonna kick him out of the promotion, because he was just a boring fighter and no one really wanted to see him. So as a last-ditch effort to keep his job, Colby decided to become a supervillain. After defeating Maia in Brazil, the Chaos took the mic and said, "Brazil, you're a dump. All you filthy animals suck." As insulting as it was to the fans and to his opponent, it got the job done. Colby kept his spot on the roster and became one of the fan favorites in the UFC. In any case, what he did was petty and disrespectful, but that's what he's all about now. Colby does this stuff almost on a daily basis now, 'cause it's what his character requires him to do. But insulting a whole nation was too much. I'm surprised he wasn't actually attacked by the fans in Brazil. Somehow, the audience still loves him. Anyway, let me tell you guys about another petty fan favorite, Jon Bones Jones. The rivalry between the GOAT and Daniel Cormier is a thing of legend. I doubt anyone else got under Jon's skin as DC did, but it brought out some of the best performances by Mr. Bones. The former UFC double champ always acknowledged Jones for his skills, but the GOAT never reciprocated the same sentiments. In fact, after winning a legendary battle against Cormier at UFC 182, Jon went on to crotch chop his opponent after the final bell had sounded. The same move that was popularized by the wrestling faction D-Generation X. Jones admitted to the fans that he was being classless at least, just cause he really didn't like DC at all. The rivalry is one of the greatest that we've seen in the Octagon for years now, and this kind of thing is somewhat expected. What's not expected is when a fighter targets his rival's child, as Isral Adesanya did. I get that the last stylebender doesn't have any love for Alex Pereira, but you still wouldn't imagine that he'd go after his son. You see guys, back in 2017 when Izzy got knocked out cold by the Poatan, the Brazilian 7-year-old son mocked the UFC middleweight champ by pretending to drop on the canvas. Adesanya didn't forget this. In fact, when he won his title back in 2023 by knocking out Pereira, he actually pointed out at his son in the crowd and did the same thing that the child did all those years ago. The Poatan's son was older by then, but a 12-year-old is still a kid. To make things worse, Izzy even admitted that he was being petty and that he hadn't forgotten what Pereira's son did all those years ago. The last stylebender also said that the child should have been whooped for being disrespectful. In the end, the Poatan buried the hatchet with Izzy, as the two men greeted each other warmly behind the scenes. No matter how big the rivalry, the fighters at least acknowledged their opposite numbers. But Ronda Rousey wasn't anything like that, and she was pretty rude to her opponents all the time. Rowdy's greatest rival was none other than Miesha Tate. Both women came in from Strikeforce, where they'd already fought once, and they brought all the bad blood with them to the UFC. The two former champs clashed once again in 2013 under the UFC banner. Ronda had been on a tear ever since she started off as a professional mixed martial artist, and many believed that Tate will be the one to take her down. The Cupcake didn't achieve that feat, but was able to take Rousey to the third round. Prior to fighting Miesha, Ronda had always been able to finish off her opponents in the very first round. After the fight was over, Tate extended her hand towards Rowdy for a handshake even though she'd lost. But Ronda even refused to acknowledge that, and instead chose to walk away from Miesha as if she just wasn't there. So, from the Rowdy refusing to shake hands with Cupcake, to the Eagle jumping out to kick his greatest rival's teammate, these were the UFC fighter's most pettiest moments.